Oh dear. Before I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer, it may be for the convenience of honourable members if I remind them that at the end of the Chancellor's speech, copies of the budget resolutions will be available to honourable members in the vote office. Mr. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, like I suspect most Chancellors, I found the preparation of this, my first budget, very exciting indeed. As usual, I've read a huge amount of speculation in the press over the last few weeks about the contents of the budget. I've also learned a number of interesting things. For example, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I was surprised last Wednesday to read that I'm almost as well known as Desert Orchid, and I haven't yet run in the Gold Cup. Mr. Deputy Speaker, actually Desert Orchid and I have a lot in common. We are both greys. Vast sums of money are riding on our performance. The opposition hopes we will fall at the first fence, and we are both carrying too much weight. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the crucial difference is that Chancellors are never favourites. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in preparing my budget, I have had one advantage, and that is of serving at the Treasury under two Chancellors. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, who last year delivered a notable budget for savers, and my right honourable friend, the member for Blaby. My right honourable friend, if I may say so, if I may make one personal observation, working for my right honourable friend was always stimulating, always exciting, and I have been extremely grateful to him for his encouragement over the years. And my admiration and respect for the right honourable member for Blaby remains undimmed, and I am very much in his debt. Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. I know it's a very exciting day in the House, but perhaps we ought to try to behave like the mother of all parliaments.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I intended to carry forward my predecessor's work. My central economic aim is to bring inflation down and to keep it down. Beyond that, my objective is to encourage enterprise by creating a broadly based tax system that allows markets to do their job with a minimum of distortion and government interference. While there is no scope this year for an overall reduction in taxes, my budget today will include measures to help business through the recession in the short term and to encourage them to invest for the longer term. It will provide assistance for families. It will also further the process of tax reform, and it will make some radical changes in the tax system. However, as usual, I shall begin with a review of the economic situation and prospects. I shall then deal with monetary policy and public finances. Finally, I will present my tax proposals. The financial statement and budget report, together with a number of press releases filling out the details of my proposals, will be available from the vote office as soon as I have sat down. I turn first to international developments. The past year has brought recession to a number of major industrial countries, including the United States, Canada, and Australia. Growth in Germany has been sustained by reunification, but elsewhere in Europe, activity has slowed and industrial production has fallen in recent months in Spain, Italy, and France. In 5 out of the 7 leading industrial nations, industrial output is now lower than it was a year ago. The basic cause is the same everywhere: very rapid growth Very rapid growth in the industrialized world during the 1980s led to the re-emergence of inflationary pressures. A period of slower growth was needed to stop inflation taking hold again. In the autumn, the slowdown was magnified by the Gulf crisis. Business and consumer confidence was badly dented, first by the uncertainties and the sharp rise in oil prices that followed the invasion of Kuwait, and then by the prospect of war. Travel and tourism were especially hard hit. Mercifully, the war was brief and the outcome successful. Confidence is recovering, and that will strengthen the economic upturn when the time comes. And the fall in oil prices has already improved the outlook for inflation. So while 1991 as a whole will show little growth in the 7 major economies, a 0.5% increase in industrial production compared to 5.75% in 1988, the slowdown is unlikely to last long. Inflation is already moderating in those countries which are in recession, and activity should start to recover later this year in North America, helped by continued expansion in Germany and Japan. In the UK, the recession came after 8 years of growth, averaging 3% a year. This sustained growth bred confidence, and that in turn led to a quite unprecedented rise in borrowing. Personal borrowing increased by nearly 40% in 1988 alone to reach £54 billion, and a new record for the ratio of debt to income. This produced a sharp drop in the personal savings ratio, which coincided with a massive boom in investment by companies. In itself, the rise of investment, nearly 80% between 1981 and 89, was welcome, but the economy could not go on expanding at that rate. Some firms and individuals became overextended, and we saw a deterioration in the current account and a wholly unwelcome rise in inflation. It is easy, with the benefit of hindsight, to say that policy should have been tighter. And once the problem became clear, policy was tightened. We ran a large budget surplus, interest rates were raised, and they had to stay high until there were unmistakable signs that excess demand pressure had been removed. This took longer than we or outside commentators expected, and the delay meant that the adjustment, when it came, was all the sharper. Since the middle of last year, individuals and companies have been taking steps to reduce their borrowing. Consumer spending has fallen back, and the savings ratio has risen sharply to 10.8%. Firms have found it hard going. Profits have weakened, caught in the pincer of low turnover and rising costs, and the burden of debt taken on in the late 1980s has proved a heavy one. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is not surprising that business investment has fallen from the heights of 1989 and early 1990. Stocks are now being reduced, and companies are making strenuous efforts to cut costs. This has led to a sharp increase in unemployment in recent months, though there are welcome signs that firms are continuing to invest in skills and training. I expect output in 1991 as a whole to be about 2% less than in 1990. Much of that fall, of course, has already happened. It is largely behind us, and as I shall be explaining in a moment, the resumption of growth should not be long delayed. The process of retrenchment has been painful, as it always is, but it has been necessary and is now producing results. The current account deficit has improved sharply, especially the balance on manufactures, even though world trade has been weak. Imports have fallen, while exports in some sectors, notably cars, have continued to grow strongly, testimony to the fact that industry is immeasurably better placed today than it was 10 years ago. And no one can doubt that inflation is on the way down. We have already seen a fall of 2 percentage points since the peak last October, and there is widespread agreement that the fall in inflation will continue through 1991 and into 1992. Indeed, the prospects are now better than they seemed at the time of the autumn statement. The February survey by the CBI showed the balance of firms expecting to increase prices was at its lowest level ever. The forecast published today, taking account of the effect of the budget measures, is for inflation to fall to an average of 4% in the last quarter of this year and below 4% in the first half of 92. The prospect, therefore, is that we will narrow the inflation gap with Europe remarkably quickly. In the mid-1980s, of course, we did get inflation briefly below 4%, and we saw the advantages that followed then. We are about to do so again, and again we will reap the benefits. For lower inflation and the lower interest rates that go with it will be a powerful force for recovery. One of the lessons that I've learned from years of grappling with economic statistics is that it is difficult to be certain about the past, let alone the future. And it is always particularly difficult to predict the timing of turning points in the economy. But there are good reasons to expect that the recovery will begin around the middle of this year, although initially it may be slow. As we found 10 years ago, confidence revives as inflation comes down. This time, the ending of the Gulf War will give the revival an added boost. Just as falling consumer spending contributed to the onset of recession, so returning consumer confidence is likely to lead the recovery. At the same time, the reduction of stocks is likely to slow, and the UK will benefit from the upturn in the United States and elsewhere in the world. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as a result, I expect output to stabilise in the next few months and then increase by about 2% between the first half of this year and the first half of 92. Looking further ahead, our projections show growth of about 3% a year as the economy recovers further. The easing of demand pressures has already brought a marked improvement in our current account. As the House will have noticed, there can be lags not just between policies and their effects, but between the effects in the real world and their appearance in the official statistics. As a result of the recent revisions of the figures for invisible imports and exports, the current account deficit for last year is now estimated at under £13 billion, £2 billion less than forecast at the time of last year's budget. This year, I expect the deficit to be halved to £6 billion, about 1% of national income. Regrettably, unemployment is likely to go on rising for a while yet, even after the recovery has started. How far and how fast it rises will depend in part on the speed with which pay settlements come down. And come down they must, eventually to the levels prevailing in other ERM countries. There is no escape route through devaluation, and firms know this. Fortunately, a sharp fall in inflation is in prospect, and the reforms we have introduced over the past decade have led to more pay flexibility. Some firms have already deferred pay settlements or agreed pay pauses. The more firms that follow their lead, the sooner we can reverse the trend in unemployment and start creating jobs once again. To sum up, the prospect for the year ahead is for an end to the recession, growth of about 2% in the 12 months to the first half of 1992, and inflation below 4%. This does not seem to me an unpromising outlook. For the longer term, there is every reason to be optimistic about the UK in the 1990s. Recessions are always painful, but they are an inescapable feature of market economies, and they are temporary. Longer-term growth depends on having a thriving, competitive private sector. That we now have, thanks to the reforms of the past 10 years. If I may confess it, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I do not believe in miracles, but I do believe that the right policies, courageously and consistently applied year by year, can produce a transformation in an economy, and that is what happened in the 1980s. So now we can build on real achievements, a record number of new businesses, faster growth in productivity than any major industrialized country, and faster growth in investment than any of those countries except Japan. These achievements have helped us over the past 7 years maintain our share of world trade after 30 years of decline. They made the 1980s the first decade since the war when the UK grew faster than Germany and France. There is one proviso, and it is a crucial one. We must get inflation down, and this time we must keep it down. For the overriding lesson of the past few years is that the battle against inflation is never won. It is fatally easy to miss the warning signs, and hard decisions have few friends. The costs of even a temporary reverse are high. Squeezing out inflation means high interest rates, frustrated hopes, bankruptcies, and lost jobs. But the costs of living with inflation are even higher, as those who remember the 1970s know only too well. Inflation makes our industry uncompetitive, it destroys savings, it creates uncertainty and strife, and a high rate of inflation can quickly get out of control. High rates of inflation are never stable. Frankly, after the experience of recent years, it surprises me how many people are urging me to let up on inflation. It may not seem much of a threat for the next 6 or 12 months, but I am concerned with the year after that and with the rest of the decade. The government's decision to join the exchange rate mechanism last October provides a more secure framework for combating inflation in the future. That is its real significance. Linking sterling to other currencies with a proven track record of low inflation will be an added discipline on monetary policy. We committed ourselves to that discipline after lengthy debate, and our decision was widely supported on both sides of the House and in the country at large. The time has now come to apply ourselves wholeheartedly to the task of making our membership a success. So far it has been. Sterling has traded comfortably within its band during a difficult period. The sterling index is much where it was just before ERM entry, and our patient approach has meant that recent reductions in interest rates have been well received by the markets. They have recognized that they are consistent with our ERM obligations as well as fully justified by the domestic economy. Our entry into the ERM means that I have had to reassess the role of domestic indicators in guiding monetary policy. It should go without saying that interest rates will be set to honour our commitment to stay within the ERM band, but there is still a most important role for domestic monetary targets. All the major countries within the ERM take the same view. Over the past year, M0, the narrow measure of money, has continued to provide timely evidence of monetary developments. Its annual rate of growth has been on a downward trend since last May. Since August, it has been within its target range of 1 to 5%. For the year ahead, I propose to set a new, slightly lower target range of 0 to 4%. This is consistent with my determination to exert further downward pressure on inflation. I shall also continue to watch closely other indicators of monetary conditions, especially M4, the measure of broad money, and also asset prices. There should be no sustained conflict between domestic monetary indicators and our ERM obligations. By far the best way of minimizing the risk that conflicts will arise in the future is to build up credibility within the ERM. The policies that are necessary to defeat inflation and to sustain the exchange rate are the same policies. For the time being, I have no plans to move to a narrow ERM band. That remains, of course, our longer-term intention, but the timing of the move must depend on the progress we make in reducing inflation. I come now to the public sector finances. Over the 1980s, my predecessors transformed our public finances and made them the envy of fellow finance ministers throughout the world. They first reduced and then eliminated our budget deficit, and in the last 3 years, they repaid £28 billion of debt. The ratio of public sector debt to GDP has been reduced from 50% in 1979 to under 30% now, to the benefit of this and future generations. I am not going to fritter that legacy away. The firm control of public expenditure remains at the centre of our strategy, and I will continue to aim for budget balance over the medium term. It is a simple rule which is well understood and requires the government to finance its spending honestly. Our entry into the ERM does not alter the requirement for fiscal policy to buttress monetary policy and play its part in curbing inflation. So sound public finances will remain central to our strategy for the 1990s. However, it is one of the more reliable laws of economics, not that there are so many, that the budget balance varies markedly over the economic cycle. When activity is growing strongly, tax revenues rise relative to income, and lower unemployment brings lower social security payments. We saw this in operation in the late 1980s when we ran large budget surpluses. These forces go into reverse when the economy slows down. That is why the budget surplus has shrunk over the past 2 years, and why we are now likely to see the temporary re-emergence of a public sector borrowing requirement. These cyclical swings in the budget balance can play a useful role in offsetting the swings in private sector borrowing and in stabilizing the economy. They come about automatically without the need for difficult judgments about the state of the economy, and it is entirely consistent with the medium-term approach that I have already outlined to tolerate these swings in the fiscal position, but I am not persuaded of the case for going beyond that. In 1990-91, the government's finances have been affected both by the onset of the recession and by the Gulf War. However, as a result of the assistance we've received from our allies, the net effect of the war on the PSBR has not been as great as we feared, and the outturn on the public expenditure planning total is expected to be a little lower than we forecast in the autumn statement. Overall, despite the war, I expect to achieve a further debt repayment this year of approaching £1 billion. For the year ahead, I judge that a deficit of £8 billion can fairly reflect the strength of cyclical influences. For the same reason, I think it will be right to tolerate a somewhat larger deficit in 92-93, for it takes time for the effects of lower activity to feed through fully onto revenue. The most notable is corporation tax, which is both highly sensitive to the economic cycle and which is paid a year in arrears. These deficits will disappear once output has returned to normal levels, just as the surpluses of the late 80s did too. Prudence dictates that I base my fiscal plans on a gradual recovery in output to its long-term trend. This implies a correspondingly gradual return to budget balance. But in practice, the speed with which this happens will depend on the exact course of the upturn. To summarize, for the year ahead, I am budgeting for a PSBR of £8 billion, 1.25% of GDP, and I expect a somewhat larger deficit in the following year. These deficits reflect the effect of lower activity on the public finances and are fully consistent with the aim of a balanced budget over the economic cycle. In order to hold to this prudent fiscal stance, my budget today will have a broadly neutral effect in the coming year, but will produce a modest increase in revenue in 92-93. Mr. Speaker, I turn now to my tax proposals. In preparing this part of my speech, I have been guided by great finance ministers of the past. First by Gladstone, whose advice on delivering tax proposals to the House of Commons was, get up your figures thoroughly and then give them out as if the whole House was interested. And secondly, I've been influenced perhaps by the Colbert, the French finance minister, who said, the art of taxation consists in so plucking the goose as to obtain the largest possible amount of feathers with the smallest possible amount of hissing. In framing my tax proposals, I have also sought to address a number of the concerns which have been put to me and to carry forward the process of tax reform initiated by my predecessors. Above all, I have produced a budget for business. I therefore begin with business taxation. In this country, there are 50,000 large companies paying the main rate of corporation tax, nearly 1 million other companies, and 3 million unincorporated businesses, many of them very small, employing a handful of people at most. We should never forget these firms. My measures are designed to benefit businesses in each of these three categories. I have been particularly concerned about businesses which are experiencing cash flow problems, often made worse by late-paying customers. I shall therefore be announcing measures which should give immediate help to businesses' liquidity. My first proposals concern the VAT regime. For 18 years, ever since VAT was introduced, the rule has been that businesses become liable for VAT when they send out bills, not when they are paid. So some traders end up paying VAT even though their customers never pay them. In his budget last year, my right honourable friend the Prime Minister introduced an entirely new system for giving traders relief on bad debts. This comes into effect on the 1st of April and extends relief to all bad debts which are at least 2 years old. Many business organisations have complained to me that this waiting period is too long. I now propose to reduce it from 2 years to 1. This will enable businesses to claim relief next year on the bad debts they occurred in 1990-91 and 89-90. The new scheme will boost businesses' cash flow next year by some £340 million. Actually, for the smallest firms, the problem of reclaiming VAT on bad debts need not arise in the first place because they can use the cash accounting scheme. This allows smaller firms to pay no VAT at all until they receive payment from their customers. Well over 100,000 traders are already using the scheme, but we estimate that a further 300,000 could do so. Customs and Excise will therefore be taking steps to publicise the cash accounting scheme more widely. There is another aspect of the VAT regime which I know causes concern: the operation of the serious misdeclaration penalty, which came into effect last April. There have been widespread complaints that the automatic penalty it imposes, 30% of the tax wrongly declared, is too severe and unfair to those who make minor mistakes. I accept that the penalty in its current form is an unnecessarily blunt instrument. We will therefore undertake a thorough review so that the SMP system can be reformed in the 1992 Finance Bill. I have also asked Customs to make some immediate changes to the rules, giving traders more time to put mistakes right themselves without incurring a penalty. I do not wish to preempt the review, but while it takes place, I am reducing the rate of penalty from 30% to 20%. Accounting for VAT can be an onerous duty for small traders. When VAT was introduced, we exempted firms with the lowest turnovers from registration. Since then, the registration has been indexed. European community constraints have meant that in the past, we have not been able to increase the threshold by more than inflation. At the end of last year, however, I pressed the case with the Commission to increase the VAT threshold. They responded very positively, and I therefore feel able to go far beyond indexation and increase the turnover limit for registration by no less than 40% to £35,000, taking it to its highest level in real terms since the introduction of VAT in 1973. This will benefit up to 150,000 traders. The cost of raising this threshold will be 25 million in the first year, rising to 40 million in 93-94. I have two further deregulatory measures to announce which will benefit very small businesses. At present, all employers have to pay over the PAYE and national insurance contributions they collect from their employees 14 days after the end of each month. But the burden of collection falls unevenly. Large firms are amply compensated for the trouble and cost of collecting the tax by the benefits of holding the money for this period. Small employers are not. I have a proposal that will reduce the burden on some 700,000 smaller employers. From May onwards, employers making PAYE and national insurance payments of less than £400 each month will pay quarterly, not monthly. This will reduce the administrative burden on firms and help their cash flow at a one-off cost to the Exchequer of £210 million. I have one further measure to announce to help very small businesses account for tax. Last year, for the first time, businesses with a turnover below £10,000 were allowed to send the Inland Revenue a simple three-line statement instead of detailed business accounts. This is an important deregulatory measure which cuts out time-consuming paperwork for up to 1 million people. From April 92, I proposed to raise the 10,000 limit so as to allow up to 500,000 more people to benefit. There is a case for making a more radical simplification of the taxation of the self-employed, and the Inland Revenue will be shortly publishing a consultative document containing our proposals. I am concerned, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the system of income tax appeals can sometimes operate unfairly, in particular because there is no provision for the award of costs. My noble and learned friend, the Lord Chancellor, and I want to deal with criticisms by the Council on Tribunals about the absence of proper rules for hearing tax appeals. We shall be publishing a consultative paper which will include proposals about the award of costs where either party has acted unreasonably. I have one proposal to limit the impact of capital gains tax on entrepreneurs and on our growing venture capital industry. I have in mind particularly those who may give up safe managerial positions to set out on the risky road of running their own business. For those people, the possibility of a large capital gains tax charge can be a deterrent. I have considered whether it would be suitable and sensible to introduce specific rules for venture capital, but I have concluded that that would be extremely difficult. But one way that we can help businessmen and women reap the rewards of their efforts is to improve the relief available to them when they retire and have to realize the asset that they have created. That is why I propose to reduce the qualifying age for capital gains tax retirement relief from 60 to 55 and to raise the limits on it. From today, the first 150,000 of capital gains and half of the next £450,000 will be exempt from capital gains tax. This will be a powerful incentive to entrepreneurs to start new businesses. I have one other important change relating to capital gains tax on small businesses. Under existing law, only companies can offset their trading losses against their capital gains. I propose to give unincorporated businesses similar treatment. This will help small businesses, if they wish, to sell off assets to help themselves through a difficult period. In addition to the measures I have announced for small business, I wish to propose some changes to corporation tax. In his budget last year, my right honourable friend the Prime Minister raised the profit limits which govern the corporation tax rates paid by smaller companies. He increased the ceiling below which single companies pay corporation tax at 25% from £150,000 to £200,000, and the upper limit above which they pay the full rate from £750,000 to £1 million. I propose this year to raise the limits again by a quarter. That means a total increase of 150% in 3 years. As a result, companies will need to be earning profits of more than £250,000 before they are liable to pay more than 25%, and companies will not have to pay the full rate of corporation tax until their profits reach £1.25 million a year. This will benefit 30,000 companies. In 1984, my right honourable friend, the member for Blaby, made a radical reform of corporation tax. In his time as Chancellor, the main rate of corporation tax was reduced in stages from 52% to 35%, thus boosting companies' post-tax profits, encouraging profitable investment at home, and increasing the incentive for overseas firms to invest in this country. I believe the philosophy behind his reforms to widen the tax base but to reduce the rates was the right one. It is a policy which has been welcomed by industry. It allows businessmen and not governments to decide how much to invest and what to invest in. It set the pattern for similar reforms in many countries throughout the world and ushered in an increase in investment of 50% between 1984 and 1990. I propose today to take a further step in that direction. Corporation tax rates have remained unchanged at 35% since 1986. But since then, the basic rate of income tax has been reduced from 30 to 25p and the top rate from 60 to 40p. I believe that the time has come to cut the main rate of corporation tax again. However, I'm also aware that cutting the rate of corporation tax only helps companies that are making a profit. Many businesses which have prospered in recent years have moved into loss this year. A cut in corporation tax does not help them, nor in some cases do existing arrangements for the carryback of losses. I'm taking 2 measures to improve company cash flow. I am cutting by 1% to 34% the main rate of corporation tax, applied retrospectively to profits earned in the financial year 1990. This will give an immediate boost to the cash flow of companies that were profitable in the year just ending. It will benefit not only companies paying at the main rate, but also the 30,000 other companies with profits between the lower and upper profits limits. And to help those profitable companies that have just moved into loss, I propose to extend the carryback period for trading losses from 1 year to 3. That means that more companies making losses will qualify for tax rebates in 92-93 valued at £250 million, which will help them to carry on through this difficult period. Mr. Deputy Speaker, but my main concern in this budget is to encourage profitable firms to go on investing in Britain's future. The best way to do this is to increase still further the post-tax return on successful investment projects. For that reason, I am cutting the main rate of corporation tax on profits earned in the 1991 financial year by 2 percentage points to 33%. The 2 reductions in the main rate from 35 to 33% will together cost £380 million in 91-92 and £830 million in 92-93. They will give us the lowest rate among our major competitors, lower than the United States and the lowest in the European community. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the 1980s were years of remarkable progress in our economy, but even more striking was the change in attitudes. The crucial importance of the market is now widely accepted in this country and even more widely accepted in this House. There is a much greater acknowledgement that market forces and competition play a vital part in shaping our economy. It is that remarkable change of ideas and attitudes that is the lasting legacy and achievement of my right honourable friend for Finchley. She recognised that the key to a better performance of the economy in the long term lies in improving the supply side. And over the past decade, that has been the aim of our tax policy, trade union and labour market reform, our competition policy, deregulation and privatisation. But if the UK economy is to perform to its full potential, we still need a more flexible labour market and a better skilled workforce. I have a number of further measures to announce to that end. If wages are inflexible, the burden of recession falls disproportionately on jobs. It is the only way for employers to cut costs. There is a considerable prize if you can get pay to take some of the strain. In 1987, we introduced a new tax relief to get profit-related pay off the ground. There are now about 1,250 such schemes in total, involving nearly 300,000 employees. But there can and should be many more, so I propose to make the scheme more attractive. At present, half of an employee's profit-related pay is tax-free. From the 1st of April, PRP will be free of all tax up to the present limits. It is worth up to a full £1,000 to a basic rate taxpayer. For some, this could be worth as much as 6p off the income tax rate. There is another way in which employees can and should enjoy a stake in the companies they work for through becoming shareholders in them. Employee share schemes have made a great deal of progress over the last 10 years. By the end of March last year, 2.25 million employees had benefited from shares or options worth more than £6.5 billion. But too often, employee share schemes have been directed solely at highly paid company executives. I believe strongly that valuable benefits of this kind should be extended to the whole workforce. I have given serious consideration to limiting executive share schemes solely to companies with all employee schemes in place, but I've instead decided to rely on the carrot rather than the stick. And from January next year, the price of shares under executive options may be set at a modest discount of up to 15% of the share's market value if, but only if, the company also has an all-employee share scheme. I also propose to increase substantially the limits on individual participation in approved all-employee share schemes and to allow companies tax relief on the costs they incur in setting up approved employee share schemes and statutory employee share ownership plans. Another aspect of the supply side which needs improvement is training. A well-trained labour force is an important element in any firm's success. Employers know that, and they are acting on it. The 1990 Labour Force Survey shows an 85% increase in the number of employees receiving job-related training since 1984. Despite the recession, the last CBI Trends Survey reported that over 75% of employers expected to spend at least as much on training in the next 12 months as they had last year, and 29% expected to spend even more. But more and more individuals are also choosing to take responsibility for their own training. Employers can get relief on the training they provide as a normal business expense, yet at present the tax system generally gives no relief to an individual who decides to pay for training to improve his or her skills. That cannot be right. If we want a better trained, more flexible workforce, we should encourage people who want to help themselves. I propose to do just that. I am introducing a tax relief for the fees paid by an individual for training towards most national vocational qualifications and their Scottish equivalents. From April 92, basic rate tax will be deducted automatically from the fees for qualifying courses, so non-taxpayers will benefit as well as taxpayers. Among those who stand to gain are women wishing to get back to work after having children. Mr. Deputy Speaker, many honourable members have pressed the case for helping two specific industries this year, shipping and films. While I sympathise with their aims, I have to say that there is a limit to the extent to which we can or should bend the tax regime to meet the special needs of any particular industry. The Gulf hostilities have reminded us of the important contribution which our merchant navy can make to defence. I recognise that there is a strategic case for measures to encourage shipping companies to draw their crews from seamen in the UK who would be willing and able to serve in time of war. Towards this end, I propose a further relaxation of the rules giving tax relief to seafarers working mainly overseas. This will mean that more seafarers will be exempt from UK tax on their overseas earnings. The film industry makes an important contribution to entertainment and culture in this country. The industry have put forward a number of proposals. Having studied these carefully, I am afraid to say that I cannot accept them, but I remain sympathetic, and if they have alternative proposals they wish to put to me over the coming year, I will very happily consider them. I know that the tax treatment of foreign exchange gains and losses causes difficulties for many businesses. This is one of the most complex, intractable areas of the tax code. Our 1989 consultative document elicited a valuable response, but no consensus on the way forward. I'm publishing today a further document setting out my specific proposals for reform, which I trust will bring greater rationality to this very important and complex area of the tax system. I have also to correct one defect in the law affecting building societies. In a recent judgment, the House of Lords concluded that regulations covering the 1986 composite rate transitional provisions for building societies were technically invalid. If I were to take no action about this, there would be a windfall gain to building societies, not their depositors, of £250 million distributed arbitrarily according to their accounting dates in 1985-86. I have therefore decided to include legislation in the Finance Bill to establish, as the Government and Parliament intended, that interest and dividends paid by societies in these transitional periods may be taxed at 85-86 rates. I turn now to trusts. In 1988, as Financial Secretary, I announced a review of their tax treatment. I am today publishing a consultative document on possible changes to the income tax and CGT regime of UK resident trusts. My proposals include an alternative structure of tax rates which would bring the treatment of trusts more into line with the treatment of individuals. They would also help to streamline the administration of trusts, saving work for trustees and their advisors. We have also been reviewing the tax treatment of non-resident trusts. This raises an important issue of principle. In recent years, the use of non-resident trusts as a means of avoiding capital gains tax has increased. I do not think it is right for a relatively small number of wealthy people to shift very large assets into offshore trusts simply in order to avoid UK tax. Such people have already benefited from the reductions in the higher rate of income tax. I therefore propose to introduce measures to counter this tax avoidance and prevent a revenue loss of up to £100 million in a full year. I turn now to charities. While people's real incomes have risen by over a third since 1979, charitable giving has more than doubled, partly as a result of the measures taken by my predecessors to encourage more giving. Tax reliefs for charities are now worth at least £800 million a year. Today, I have some modest improvements to announce to the tax regime for charities. I have two measures that should boost giving by businesses. The first is a new relief from income and corporation tax to encourage business gifts of equipment to schools and to other educational establishments. The second concerns the gift aid scheme introduced last year. The gift aid scheme allows companies and individuals to get tax relief on cash donations to charities up to a limit of £5 million a year under the gift aid scheme. company groups have found that the division of this upper limit between them prevents them from donating as much as they would like. To overcome this problem, I propose to abolish the limit altogether from today. In recent years, there has been an increase, a remarkable increase, in corporate donations to charities, and I hope that this further measure will encourage companies to give even more. I also propose to adjust some existing VAT reliefs for charities and ease the conditions for the relief from car tax for vehicles leased to disabled people. I come now to a proposal to benefit both sport and the arts. Last year, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, reduced pool betting duty on the condition that the benefit was passed to the Football Trust. Following the success of that measure, a proposal has been put to me by one of the pool's promoters for a new foundation for both sport and the arts. League football benefited from last year's budget measure, and racing benefits from the horse racing betting levy. This new foundation is intended to provide assistance to other sports and to the arts. It will be financed by contributions collected by the pool's promoters, along with the weekly pool's betting stakes, and should raise some £40 million a year. On the understanding that all the main pool's companies agree to participate, and that the full amount would be passed on to a new trust established in satisfactory terms, I would be willing to reduce pool betting duty a final time from 40% to 37.5%. These arrangements would be subject to a review in 4 years' time. They should make a further £20 million a year available, giving £60 million a year in total to the foundation in order to support both sport and the arts. I come now to excise duties. First, I propose to raise the duties on alcoholic drinks to maintain their real value. That means the duties will rise from 6 o'clock tonight by 9.3%, in line with the increase in the retail prices index in the year to December 1990. That will put about 2p on a pint of beer, 9p on a bottle of wine, and around 56p on a bottle of spirits. I will also be legislating to change the basis on which beer is taxed. The existing system of taxing the so-called worts was introduced by my predecessor, Mr. Gladstone. It will now be replaced by one in which the end product, the beer itself, is taxed. The new system will relate the duty more closely to the alcoholic strength of the beer, with a higher tax levied on strong lagers than on low alcohol beers. I propose increasing all tobacco duties by 15%, well above the rate of inflation. This will add about 16p to the price of a packet of 20 king-size cigarettes, and I regret to say around 8p to a packet of small cigars. There are strong health arguments for a big duty increase on tobacco. In recent years, the duty has fallen in real terms, and cigarette consumption, having declined in the early 1980s, has begun to turn up again. Raising the duty will help to counter this unwelcome trend. The motor car imposes large costs on others in the form of pollution and congestion. I have decided, therefore, to increase the duties on petrol and derv by 15%, giving the private motorist a strong incentive to choose more fuel-efficient vehicles and ensuring that those who pollute most pay most. This is fully in line with the policy set out last year in the government's white paper on the environment. A litre of leaded petrol will rise by nearly 4p, a litre of unleaded by about 3p, and a litre of diesel by just over 3p. The tax differential between leaded and unleaded will increase, giving a further boost to the take-up of unleaded. I propose to freeze vehicle excise duty for private cars and light vehicles at £100 for the 6th year running, and also to freeze VED for all heavy goods vehicles. Mr. Deputy Speaker, many motorists do not own their own cars, but drive those provided by their employers. The scales for taxing the private use of company cars have been substantially increased in recent budgets, but many employers continue to pay their employees in cars rather than in money. I propose to increase the car scales again this year by 20%. This increase will yield £190 million in 91-92 and £250 million in 92-93. If people are paid in kind, there is no reason why they should be taxed more lightly than people paid in cash. Yet our present system also gives employers an incentive to provide employees with cars rather than cash. Under our present arrangements, they avoid making any contribution to the National Insurance Fund on the benefit the employee gets from the private use of a car. I propose that company cars and fuel should now become liable for national insurance contributions, assessed according to the scale charges used for taxation. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Social Security, will introduce a bill to that end. Employers will pay at the main rate, but there will be no change for employees. Employers' national insurance contributions on cars and fuel will yield an extra £610 million a year of contributions. This will reduce an anomaly in the national insurance contributions system, making it more neutral between different kinds of payment, and will widen the national insurance contributions base. These new arrangements will take effect from April, but contributions will be collected annually in arrears, so employers will not be asked to pay their first contribution until June 1992. They are already familiar with the scale charges used for the tax, so they should be able to make the necessary calculations with the minimum amount of extra work. They are already familiar with the scale charges. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I turn now to what I regard as one of the greatest scourges of modern life. I refer to the mobile telephone. I propose to bring the benefit of car phones into income tax and to simplify the tax treatment of mobile phones by introducing a standard charge on the private use of such phones provided by an employer. Tax will be paid on £200 for each phone in 91-92. I hope that as a result of this measure, restaurants will be quieter and the roads will be safer. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have already drawn attention to the imbalance between savings and investment and its effects in the late 1980s. As companies found more and more opportunities to invest, we needed more savings, but instead the savings ratio fell. In successive budgets, my predecessors introduced new tax incentives to save. Many forms of saving now enjoy a highly privileged tax position. Last year in particular, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, announced a new scheme, the tax-exempt special savings account. TESA has proved a spectacular success since it arrived on the savings scene nearly 3 months ago, and has encouraged the savings habit among ordinary taxpayers. Already over 1.5 million people have opened accounts. My right honourable friend also announced in his budget last year the abolition of composite rate tax. From the 6th of April, non-taxpayers will no longer have to pay tax on their accounts with banks and building societies. These are far-reaching reforms and need time to settle down and to take effect. So this is not the year to disturb the regime we have just put in place or risk causing confusion with further schemes. My main concern has been to consolidate the system we already have, although I do have some modest changes to announce. I propose to raise the capital gains annual exempt amount to £5,500 and the inheritance tax threshold to £140,000 this year, in line with inflation. national savings continue to play an important role, particularly for small savers. This summer, I propose to introduce a new national savings children's bond for children under 16. There will also be a new issue of fixed interest savings certificates with a maximum investment of £5,000 compared with £1,000 on the last issue. Other changes to national savings products will be set out in a press release issued today. I am also removing the restrictions on friendly societies writing tax-exempt life insurance policies for children and increasing the limit on premiums for their tax-exempt policies generally from £150 to £200. Personal equity plans remain an important means of promoting direct share ownership. Since their introduction in 1987, about 1.2 million PEPs have been taken out and over £3 billion has been invested. I have some further changes to announce. First, I intend to allow investment in European Community as well as UK shares, both for individuals and for unit and investment trusts. Secondly, to promote the investment of single company PEPs, I propose to allow investors to put up to £3,000 a year in a single company PEP, as well as up to £6,000 a year as now in a general plan. This will allow total investments of up to £9,000 a year. While single company PEPs are available to any investor, I believe they provide a natural home for shares acquired under employee share schemes. I therefore propose to allow shares acquired under approved all-employee share schemes to be transferred directly into the company PEP with no charge to capital gains tax. Employee share schemes and PEPs have encouraged individuals to become shareholders, but many people have bought their first shares in big offers, mainly privatisations. The first of these to catch the public's imagination was British Telecom. The government currently still owns some 48% of the shares, and I can announce today that I intend to sell part of this holding in the coming year. Privatisations have been a great success. The next step is to encourage people to invest in shares more generally. One problem is that to the small investor, the stock market can seem remote, intimidating, and somewhat expensive. The development of a genuine retail market for shares in high streets up and down the country would be highly desirable. To give this the boost it deserves, the government is considering a change in the way in which it markets privatisations. For future large flotations, I am today inviting proposals from the private sector for arrangements to distribute shares directly to the public through high street retail networks. I hope that there will be proposals both from financial institutions, banks or building societies, and from companies outside the financial sector. If satisfactory proposals can be developed in time, I will consider using such a high street network in the sale of British Telecom shares. Such a high street network could be used for primary issues, not only by the government, but by private sector companies, and in the longer term, it could provide a cheap and accessible way for individuals to buy and sell in the secondary market. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the measures I have just announced will encourage people to save, but there is another side to the story. For the fall in the savings ratio at the end of the 1980s was a result not of a fall in gross savings, so much as an increase in borrowing, particularly mortgage borrowing. In part, that reflects the remarkable increases in home ownership over the past decade. That has been and remains a key objective of policy for this government. A less desirable development, however, was the dramatic boom in house prices during the late 1980s, which fueled borrowing and helped boost inflation. Many first-time buyers found prices rising much faster than their incomes. We need to do all we can to ensure that when recovery comes, it is not accompanied by another bout in house price inflation, with the unwelcome consequences that that would have for inflation, but also interest rates. I propose to leave the ceiling for mortgage interest relief unchanged at £30,000, but from the 6th of April 1991, I propose that relief should be allowed only at the basic rate. This will yield £220 million in 91-92 on the basis of current interest rates and £420 million in 92-93. I recognise that some people have arranged their affairs on the assumption that higher rate relief will continue. Therefore, to reduce the amount of extra tax they have to pay, I propose to increase the starting point for higher rate tax from £20,700 to £23,700, £1,000 more than required to match inflation. This will keep the number of higher rate payers broadly stable and will mean that a married man will not become liable to higher rate tax until his earnings rise to nearly £29,000. My objective is to reduce the tax subsidy to borrowing without significantly increasing the average tax burden on higher rate taxpayers. Taking these changes with the changes to the personal allowances that I am about to announce, the typical increase in liability for a higher rate taxpayer with a £30,000 mortgage will be only around £1 a week. Of course, the main determinant of the cost of a mortgage is not tax relief but interest rates. For a higher rate taxpayer with a £50,000 mortgage, the fall in the typical mortgage rate that has already taken place since last autumn fully offsets the change I am making to mortgage interest relief. I now come to income tax. Income tax is never welcome, but paying tax unexpectedly is even less so. That is the position facing employees who were working in Kuwait and Iraq at the time that the Gulf crisis began. They may now become liable to pay UK tax on their foreign earnings, which they had expected to be exempt. I propose that employees who had intended to work in Kuwait or Iraq for a year or more, but were forced to return home earlier by the crisis, should not be taxed on their foreign earnings. I have no changes to make to either the basic rate or the higher rate of income tax. Our objective remains to move towards a basic rate of 20p, but I cannot make further progress towards it this year. Our priority has to be to reduce taxes on business. I propose this year to uprate the personal allowance in line with inflation. It will rise by £290 to £3,295. The personal allowance for the over 65s will increase by £350 to £4,020, and for those aged 75 and over by £360 to £4,180. The married couples allowance for the elderly will also be increased in line with inflation from £2,145 and £2,185 to £2,355 and £2,395. The income limit for the allowances for the elderly will increase by £1,200 to £13,500. However, I am not proposing to increase the married couples allowance for couples under 65 or for the allowances that are linked to it. They will stay at £1,720. I know that there is a widespread view in the House and in the country that more should be done to help families with children. I propose to use the resources released by not increasing the married couples allowance for that purpose. There are some, I know, who advocate the reintroduction of child tax allowances. I have looked at that option carefully, but I am clear, especially following the introduction of independent taxation, that it would not be an effective way of channeling resources to those who need them. A better way of directing help straight into the pockets of mothers, whether they choose to work or not, is child benefit. It goes to all families, to the children of non-taxpayers, as well as the children of taxpayers. I therefore propose to increase child benefit from the 7th of October by £1 a week for the first eligible child in each family and by 25 pence a week for other children. These rises come on top of the increase announced by my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Social Security last autumn, which will be paid from the 8th of April. This means that in October this year, a benefit of £9.25 will be payable for the first child and £7.50 for each subsequent child. We will ensure that increases benefit not only taxpayers but the very poorest families, those on income support and family credit. These increases will help 6.8 million families and 12.3 million children. I should add that the government has decided that the new levels of child benefit will be uprated in line with inflation next April and in subsequent years. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the measures I have announced today maintain a responsible fiscal policy while giving help to industry and families. They also include some important reforms to the tax system. However, my budget would not be complete if it did not address one other issue, which has attracted a certain amount of attention recently. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for the Environment, will be announcing very soon the conclusions of our review of local government. I do not propose to anticipate a statement, but there is one announcement I want to make today. In January, we announced a £1 billion package to reduce the community charge for more than half of all charge payers. Since then, I have been considering whether the impact of local expenditure on the local taxpayer is too great for any system of local taxation to bear. I have concluded that local taxes are being asked to bear too large a burden, and that the level of the community charge is still too high. However, if local taxes are to fall and the standard of local services is to be maintained, then taxes elsewhere must rise. I propose, therefore, to make a substantial switch from local to central taxation. This will amount to about £4.25 billion in the coming financial year, 91-92, and will reduce the net yield of local taxation to about £7 billion. This large reduction in local taxation will take it to a level that the government believes should be sustainable in the longer term. We will be introducing a bill in the next few days to authorise payments of extra grant to local authorities and ensure that community charge payers will reap the full benefit in reduced charges in the coming year, that is 91-92. The money, Mr. Deputy Speaker,
haven't got much to say after this, Neil.
The money will not be available to increase local authority spending. Domestic rate bills in Northern Ireland will be reduced as well. The bill will also ensure that charge payers do not have to start paying their charges until the new and lower charges have been introduced. My right honourable friend, the Lord President, will be making a statement later today on the arrangements for the bill. The switch requires, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the switch requires a substantial increase in central taxation. I have decided that this should be achieved by raising indirect taxes, that is to say, taxes on spending. I am proposing, therefore, from the 1st of April to increase the standard rate of value-added tax by 2.5 percentage points to 17.5%. VAT is a broadly based tax. VAT is a broadly based tax which falls on consumers rather than producers. Since much consumer spending is zero-rated, it bears less heavily on poorer households than on the better off. So raising VAT is not only an efficient but also a fair way to raise the necessary finance. and raising taxes on spending rather than taxes on income will be better for savings and consistent with our strategy for tax reform, first set out by my right honourable friend, the member for Surrey East, in his 1979 budget. Raising VAT will increase some prices, but the reduction in the community charge will more than offset that effect, so that the switch will actually reduce the retail price index. As a result of these changes, the community charges recently announced in England and Wales and Scotland will be cut by £140. On average, the headline charge will be reduced from about £390 to about £250 in both England and Scotland, and from about £260 to about £120 in Wales, while the amounts people actually have to pay, after allowing for relief and benefits, will fall to under £175 in Great Britain. The charge in Shetland will fall to under £1. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the measures I have announced are designed to meet three requirements of any budget. Firstly, they represent sound finance and contribute to a firm counter-inflation policy. My predecessor transformed public finances in the 80s. My proposals will keep us on track to balance the budget over the 90s. Second, they respond to the economic needs of the moment. I have cut taxes on business both this year and next to help it weather the recession and take advantage of the upturn later in the year. Third, they continue with the reform of the tax system to improve the working of the economy. In addition, when resources are tight, I have been able to give additional help to families with children. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I have made a decisive reduction in the burden of local taxation across the country and cut community charges in the coming year by £140. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this budget is good for business, good for families, good for charge payers, and good for the country. I commend it to the House.
Order! 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 On standing order number 50, the first motion. Order! Understanding order number 50, the first motion entitled Provisional Collection of Taxes must be decided without debate. Chancellor to move formally, please. Question is that, pursuant to Section 5 of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act 1968, provisional statutory effect shall be given to the following motions. A. Spirits motion number 2. B. A rate of duty motion number 3. C. Wine and made wine motion number 5. D. Cider motion number 6. E. Tobacco product motion number 7. F. Hydrocarbon oil motion number 8. G. Vehicles excise duty rates motion number 9. H. Vehicles excise duty exemption 1 motion number 10. And I. Value added tax penalty for serious misdeclaration motion number 15. As many as are other to say aye. The contrary no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. I shall now call upon the Chancellor to move the motion entitled Amendment to the Law, and it is on that motion that the budget debate will take place today and on the succeeding days. The remaining motions will not be put until the end of the budget debate next week, and they will then be decided without debate. Chancellor to move formally, please. Question is the motion, the amendment to the law motion, Mr. Neil Kinnock.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, may I begin with the customary, traditional congratulations to the Chancellor on the way in which he delivered his budget speech to us this afternoon. And indeed, my congratulations are even warmer than they would otherwise be, in view of the fact that he has provided us this afternoon with what must be the biggest climb down in modern political history. After those years, 2 years, of a wasted £10 billion on the misery and injustice and inefficiency of the poll tax. We now have a system in which the government is backing off that which was, but a year ago, less than that indeed, their flagship. They will indeed be rejoicing, there will be less rejoicing, of course, over the fact that the Right Honourable Gentleman now proposes to collect more in VAT, despite his protestations. This is not a fair way to collect additional taxation. By definition, that tax is regressive on people on median incomes, average incomes, and on low incomes. Yes, yes, yes. It takes, Mr. Deputy Speaker, a disproportionate proportion of those average and lower incomes when people pay their VAT, and everybody knows it. And not content, Mr. Deputy Speaker, not content with the debate over whether we were going to have a head tax or a granny tax or a bedroom tax, we've now got a system of raising taxation to pay for local government services that's even going to tax children on their sweets when they pay their sweets. There couldn't be a broader scoop of tax to try and bail the government out of all the stupidity of the poll tax mess they got into. And that's without, Mr. Deputy Speaker, all of the disasters that will be inflicted, that's not an overstatement in any sense, on the cash flow of local government as they have to cope with an entirely different system of provision of revenue in order to meet those local services. We shall watch it and examine it in close detail, and we'll be amazed, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if the Right Honourable Gentleman gets the response from the British public for which he's seeking. They hated the poll tax, they're going to hate this con just as much as they hated that tax. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we do find, of course, items in this budget which we have cause to welcome. They will, for instance, as my right honourable friends were remarking, in the wake of the imposition of taxes on mobile phones, be dancing in the streets in Isloyn and Sparkbrook and Monklands East at the way in which the Chancellor has attacked what he called one of the greatest scourges of modern times. I must say he must have a very peculiar perspective of what modern scourges are. I thought it was at that point that he was going to try and deal with all the iniquities of the poll tax. But we do welcome. There's much agreement on other assistance being provided, particularly for small businesses. The VAT relief on bad debts of more than a year, for instance, is something for which we called last year, and we give it all the warmer welcome when the Chancellor introduced it this year. The raising of the VAT threshold to £35,000 for small businesses is also welcome, something that we have joined small business, as indeed many of his honourable friends have, in urging, and the simplification and reduction of small firms' corporation tax liabilities is very sensible. The only problem is with other changes that the Chancellor is proposing to make with corporation tax on firms of a variety of sizes, is whilst they certainly need relief as a consequence of the difficulties that they've been experiencing over recent years particularly, £380 million this year, says the Chancellor, and £800 million in future years. We have to make the point that if the Chancellor did have resources of this kind available, they would be better used as capital allowances, which would then seek to encourage, indeed provide incentives for the movement of extra investment in the manufacturing industry. That will be a subject of close attention and further debate between the two sides of the House. And we do warmly welcome the limitation which he has announced today of mortgage tax relief to the basic rate of income tax. This has been our policy for several years past. The Chancellor, inadvertently I'm certain, is going to make our job much easier when after the next general election we form the government. Mr. Speaker, one last point in immediate response to what the Right Honourable Gentleman has said in his first budget today, and that is to refer to the changes which he announced in respect of child benefit. Frankly, from the leader, I really did think that we were going to get another spectacular somersault from the Right Honourable Gentleman. I actually thought that he was going to cast back those years under the Right Honourable Lady, and indeed under the previous Chancellors of the Exchequer, in which the value of child benefit was significantly reduced. I thought that from a family man himself, there was going to come some understanding of just how significant child benefit is to very, very large numbers of families on average and below average incomes, especially in this country. What did we get? The postponed payment of an extra £1 for the first child and 25p for other children. I wonder that he had the gall to come here and announce 25p for... Surely he must have some idea of what the expenses of bringing up a child are, even somebody on his income. But when he takes into account what those expenses are for families, working families, and families that can't get jobs, then really not to have acknowledged their proper need for extra child benefit shows a contempt for their interests. In order, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for the child benefit to be put back to the level that it was at when the government froze it, there would have had to be £2.30 increase for all the children other than the first child, and £1.30 for the first child. The government's failure to do that shows once again that they're sustaining this continual bias that they've had for 12 years against those of modest incomes and in favour of the best off in this country. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, has presented his first budget. It is also, of course, the first budget since Britain became an exchange rate mechanism economy. It is a budget presented just 21 months before the completion of the single market of the European Community. It is a budget in a recession. Given those dominating realities, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it was reasonable to expect that the Chancellor would have addressed all of those realities very directly in his budget. You would have expected him to face up very squarely to the challenges posed by these conditions that we're in and conditions that our economy faces. But he didn't. Instead of that, he dodged. He gave us a short-term budget. He gave us a tinkering budget. It's a budget that won't stop the slump. It won't help to build strength for the future. It will do nothing to enhance the competitiveness of British industry. As the completion of the single market draws nearer, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we see in our neighbouring economies, in our competitor economies, economic growth and investment performance that vastly exceeds that of this country under this government. The Chancellor spoke of recession everywhere. Well, let's put that into a perspective. In Italy, growth is running at 2.4%, investment at 4.1%. In France, growth is running at 2%, investment at 3%. In Germany, growth is running at 4.8%, investment at 5%. In Britain, after 12 years of this government, growth is minus 2%, overall investment is minus 3.4%. Manufacturing investment, after 12 years in charge of the country that used to be a workshop of the world, manufacturing investment, essential to any future success for our economy, is falling by 15% year on year. Yesterday's figures on manufacturing output showed a rate of fall of 8% this year. We should have had a statement of shame from the Chancellor of the Exchequer about figures and performance like that. Nothing like that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, nothing like that is occurring in any comparable economy. They are building up their economies in the approach to 1992. This government is running down the British economy in the approach to 1992. And there's certainly nothing at all in this budget that will help to get Britain back to the growth or to the investment levels of those competitors before the single market is completed. The Prime Minister says he wants Britain to be where we belong, at the very heart of Europe. He said that last week. It's a commendable aspiration, one indeed many of us share. The trouble is that after these Tory years, we shall not be at the very heart of Europe where we belong. We shall be at the tail of Europe where this government has put our country. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there is nothing in this budget to stop that occurring. In the wake of this budget, unemployment will go on rising, firms will go on closing, businesses will go on failing. The cut in interest rates that we expect either today or before the end of the week or sometime next week should, of course, help to mitigate all of that pressure of slump. But welcome and necessary. Though the cut will be, left at that, it won't be enough to stop the recession spreading, to stop the recession deepening. The damage done to the economy in Britain, to industry, to services in Britain, by this government's policies is so deep and so wide that the effects of the slump made in Downing Street will run on for a long time to come. In Britain now, 3,000 jobs are being lost every day. In Britain now, 100 businesses fail every day. And the industries and the firms that go out of production today are unlikely to reappear tomorrow. There is a permanent loss of industrial capacity. Since the Second World War, Britain has only been through this experience just once before, and that was in the last Tory slump less than 10 years ago. Chancellor said, recessions are always painful. The only experience we have of recessions are under the governments that he supports. It's no accident, Mr. Deputy Speaker. No accident. There was a genuine worldwide slump in the wake of oil price rises in the mid-1970s. It hit every production, every industrial country, indeed every country. The only two other recessions we've had since 1945 have been under this government. That's more than coincidence. The difference, of course, between the last recession and this recession, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that this time the government's policies are even killing off the survivors. Companies that managed to pull through the last recession have been unable to beat this one. Enterprises that have been formed and built since the last recession have been wiped out. Firms of all sizes are burdened by debt, including the so-called distress borrowing, running at over 20 billion, some say 25 billion a year in this country now. Companies borrowing to survive, not for investment, not for development, not for expansion. And the redundancy notices, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and the bankruptcy lists are not confined to the so-called old industries or to the so-called traditional industrial areas. In electronics and aerospace, machine tools and textiles, software, construction, engineering, well-managed, progressive, forward-looking companies are going down. Unemployment is gripping the South and gripping the Midlands, just as it's going up yet again in Scotland and in Wales and in the north of England. So many of the people who are victims of this recession were promised an economic miracle by this government. They were encouraged to borrow and to spend by this government. They were told that they were part of an enterprise society by this government. And those people, as they testify daily, have been deceived. They have been betrayed by this government, which many of them voted for. But in this economic survey that we heard this afternoon, in the course of his budget speech, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in his budget retrospective, the Chancellor hardly gave a word, hardly gave a thought to those people, or to their jobs, or to their industries, or to their futures. I suppose that if he did give a thought to them, if he had given any extensive reference to those people and their difficulties, he would have had to say how deep the recession really is and where the recession really came from. And if he'd done that, then he would have had to condemn the Prime Minister, the ex-Chancellor, sitting right next to him. That's not just my judgment, Mr. Speaker. An experienced commentator recently reported that the Chancellor, that is to say the Right Honourable Gentleman there, is tightly boxed in by factors not so much of his own making, but that of his predecessor, and his predecessor but one. Now that is the gentleman, that is the Right Honourable Gentleman for Chingford, speaking, making a report, earning a few bob in the course of doing it in the Daily Express. And nobody could describe him as a commentator unfavourable to the Right Honourable Gentleman opposite, because he was amongst the first to say that the Prime Minister was the most natural successor to the Right Honourable Lady for Finchley. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I suppose that the Chancellor and the Prime Minister and the rest of the government would like to be recalled as the people who took on rising inflation and then pushed it down again. But there are two very big blemishes in that record, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The first is, of course, that they are the people who brought the inflation in the first place. And second, that the very same policies that they used in order to squeeze demand and inflation are also the policies that are crushing firms and crushing industries and crushing jobs. If the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the government want to claim any credit at all for combating inflation, then they are also going to have to take the blame for causing the slump. There is certainly no one else that deserves that blame. After 12 years in office, as the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Shropshire South, said 2 weeks ago, there are no Conservative alibis. That's certainly true. And it's also true, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that if this government ever got more time in power, they'd go on doing the same thing. They'd eventually float the economy out of a slump simply by relying on a rise in credit finance consumption. They have no other policy for recovery, as they've demonstrated before. They would try to tackle the resulting inflationary pressures in the economy with high interest rates. They have no other policy, as they've demonstrated before. That would push up prices, debts and wage claims. It would push down investment and output yet again. It would wipe out industrial capacity yet again. They haven't just done that once in the last decade, they've done it twice in the last decade. And they haven't changed the policies that they followed then. Still, they haven't learned. I watched the Panorama programme, as I suspect many honourable and right honourable members did yesterday evening, the programme that Panorama did on the slump and the way in which it was spreading. And I saw the Secretary of State for Trade and Industry saying that he was certain that industry is poised to respond to a growth in demand. How can he say that, Mr. Deputy Speaker? It didn't occur on the last occasion. It didn't happen last time. And when the government's policies wiped out 20% of British manufacturing capacity in the early 1980s and then let credit rip in the mid-1980s, British industry wasn't able to respond to the rise in demand. And the result was, as the Secretary of State for Trade and Industry should understand, that Britain got its first ever deficit in manufactured trade, a huge balance of trade deficit, and then, of course, a gigantic balance of payment deficit. So big indeed, so big, that it remains at the figure that the Chancellor of the Exchequer gave us this afternoon, despite 2 years of crushing deflationary policies. We've still got a level of balance of payments deficit that would have been utterly unacceptable in any previous period. In any previous period when this economy never had the benefit of North Sea oil and self-sufficiency. Mr. Speaker, yet again, the Chancellor today did nothing to stop that history of deficit repeating itself as tragedy. There was no strategy to this budget, merely expediency. And there's no effort in this budget or in any of the other government policies to help to create an environment in which productive industry can thrive and become more competitive. There was no sign, not so much as a real hint of any significant policy for promoting industrial investment in research and development and in technology transfer. The best that we've got was a welcome way indeed, of trying to help out companies that have hit particular difficulties as a result of the government's policies. There was no commitment and certainly no practical means proposed of maintaining macroeconomic stability in 12 years. They have never managed to achieve the sustained low interest rates that are essential to that. And the only way that they've ever got inflation down at all is by throttling the economy with very high interest rates, the opposite to stability. In 12 years, the other critically important ingredients of competitiveness and of combating inflation, sustained improvements in the transport system, in training and education, have never got the necessary priority from this government. They certainly got very scant attention today, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Indeed, education, the cause of great anxiety amongst many parents, the cause of great anxiety to the public and to industry, is now made, so we understand, into a poll tax plaything, and the cuts go on. Just an example, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Last week, 17 Conservative-controlled local education authorities announced £54 million worth of additional cuts in education, the only reason being that they wanted to try to stay within the limits set down by this government, the government that is supposed to have education close to its heart. And now, if the government has its way, education is to be balkanized into a tangle of opted-out schools and underfunded colleges. And the chaotic experiment of the 1980s will extend into the 1990s. Now we know, when we view that, what the Prime Minister really meant when he told the Times just a few weeks ago that whilst education was closest to his heart, his thoughts were not yet fully worked up. I approach this issue, said the Right Honourable Gentleman, with an instinct that something needs to be done. And we're trying to determine exactly what it is. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is trying to determine exactly what he wants for education. And while the Prime Minister is dithering, millions of other British people, with children approaching school age and children of school and college age, are being very worried. Industrialists and potential employers are urging a new scale of provision and performance in investment in education. All are looking at our neighbours who are making the proper investments in education and training so that their people reap the rewards of new skills and their economies reap the rewards of extra strength and competitiveness. Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman thinks it's very funny. He's going to have to explain how it is, in the middle of a deep slump, Britain has still got skill shortages after 12 years of Tory government. He's still going to have to explain why it is that industrialist after industrialist, employer after employer, people who are political allies of his, are hot in their condemnation of the absolutely miserable record of the government over all these years. From this government, and in this budget yet again, we will get nothing that makes a comparable commitment to that which is made in the neighbouring and competing countries. There never will be that commitment. 12 years of power, with £100 billion of oil revenues, £62 billion of asset sales, the highest tax burden in British history. The government have never made the necessary investment. Now we hear the Prime Minister saying just last week, we've been going in a particular direction for 12 years and we shall continue to go in that direction. That was intended, I suppose, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to reassure the Finchley matriarch and her remaining followers. But the Prime Minister's words are a warning to all those who in 12 years have been engulfed by spreading poverty. It is a warning to those who have been the victims of having security and success snatched from them by unemployment, high interest rates, business failures, high mortgage rates. The people who should be warned are those who have been the victims of industrial decline and of decay in the essential community and welfare services. It's a warning that a government that says it is going in the same direction as it has for the last 12 years will take Britain and the British people further behind. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the depths of a recession, this needed to be a budget to build out of recession. It needed to be a budget that helped to lay foundations for future economic strength. Instead of that, we got a government from a budget from a government that won't learn from its own failures, and even worse, won't learn from the success of others. Mr. Speaker, the British people know that that's true of them. They know, too, that this government ruled the wasted decade of the 1980s. When they call the general election and give the British people the chance, they will stop them wasting the 90s.
Mr. John Biffin.